looks good in there. It's nice to see. Very nice to see. And I find this interesting, how little the brakes actually wear. You know, I have this constant sort of worry or belief that I need to be in here and adjusting these things, and I've never ever turned an adjustment knob. And I think they just wear so slowly, primarily because low speeds and, well, quite frankly, not all that much weight. But I do like to see this. Look at one of my first videos. I took this thing off, and it was a bundle of rust because whoever put the truck together last they'd forgotten that this is not a grease hub. Must have been a civilian, and they hadn't greased the inner wheel bearing. These front axles obviously are not grease hubs. So I'm in here today because I want to change out a boot. To be honest, it's not all that bad, and I'm really kind of toying with the idea of just leaving the dang thing alone, but this will have the boot fixed. The only boot I have on hand right now is a non-zipper boot, so it means going all the way into it. And I do plan on trying zipper boots, but I also know that both of these hubs, quite frankly, they just don't have enough grease inside. They just don't, so I need to add grease to them. And I'd also like to check a weird theory I have. You know, we know that these front axles, these drive lines on most of these things, are just a regular sealed greasable U-joint in a situation where you can't get a grease gun anywhere near it. And I'm kind of wondering, were they meant to be greasable? Was it always intended that I could grease this thing? So the goal here, I think I'm going to pull this all the way back apart. I want to see if those Allen head ports were originally designed for some sort of special grease fitting to get in there and grease them. I don't know if it's true or not, but I want to look at it. You know, you read about guys packing these things full of grease, and, well, it won't do any good. I mean, maybe if you pulled the lip seal, you could do that. You could pull the lip seal out of these U-joints in here. Then some of that grease would get in there, but otherwise the seals keep the grease out, just like they keep the grease in. I'm just curious, what was the intention there, and if that idea would in fact work. I'm happy with this. I'm going to pull the whole mess apart, get this hub off, get that axle out, try to keep everything clean. I don't want to have to, you know, clean and repack my bearings. They should be fine. I just want to pull it apart, put a new boot in there, bunch of new fresh grease inside the hub, put it all back together. This side doesn't even need a seal, so as long as I don't damage it getting it apart, I should be able to get it back together. No real surprises. Getting a little bit of brake dust contamination on the inner wheel bearing, getting past the seal there, so maybe I'm going to have to knock that inner one out and repack it regardless. Brake shoes look okay. This one's wearing with a tiny bit of taper to it. I don't suspect it's too bad. This is kind of fascinating to me. It's given a bit of a false reading as to the wear on the shoes. It's like the brake drum isn't far enough back. Now I have checked, and there's no signs that the seal is bottoming out. I did have that on one of the trucks I got. I don't know if it was the wrong seal or it wasn't seated all the way. Anyways, the seal had bottomed on the back and destroyed itself. That's why I always recommend pulling these things apart at least once. Brake drum, brake dust. Well, for the moment anyways, gonna pull the springs, remove the shoes, pressure wash them, because I don't want to be dealing with that crap there. And then while they're wet, with a mask, I'll take a bit of a grinder and remove, I'll just chamfer these shoes back. And that'll enable me to have a little better, I don't know if that shows up on camera. Yeah, it's .16. I don't know. It'll at least enable me to have a little better idea of what's going on in there. Here's what they look like now with that edge relieved. I ended up just using a big old bastard file because I didn't want. So boy, something went through the shoe right there. Because I didn't want the dust. This right here is why guys do the zipper boots. Look at this mess. However, it's very clean. Shows there isn't a whole lot of contamination from gear oil in there. Some for sure, but not a tremendous amount. Those are those rubber seals that I was telling you about. So having this whole hub completely full of grease with this kind of U-joint is completely meaningless. Totally meaningless. I know some of them have what they call it, the bar field, right? Basically a big CV joint in there. But these, I'm not sure the point. With those U-joints, I don't get what they're doing. Okay, there is a little more gear oil in there than I originally thought. So that's probably more telling. Is there's grease on the backside. Upshot. It's clean. It's really clean. How the heck am I going to turn this camera off? Here's a tip for you. Unless you get this rubber boot all the way back, that is, remove that clamp, the band clamp, pull it all the way back, it's dang near impossible to lift this knuckle up and out. There's a bit of a concave down there, so you sort of center this so that the thing is tipping down. Tip that up, lift it, and then there's a slot right here, and this should just come out over the top. If that rubber is in the way, you really can't lift it high enough. Some enterprising GI, whoever put this last one together, I can't remember if I was the last one to take these apart or not. It's got my copper NICs. Comes from an old can I inherited and I love it, even though most everybody uses silver. So it's got my copper NICs on it. But that would mean that this rubber boot rotted out in a year and a half. So I can't remember if I've been in here or not. Also, RTV gray. Usually I use RTV blue. So I don't know. I don't know if this is my work or not. If it was, I was freaking genius because I glued with the silicone the nut onto this whole entire hardware right here. Worked a treat if that was your idea. If it was my idea, well, I don't remember having it, and it might have been an accident. But anyways, you got to get this boot all the way back, and then that'll lift off. Water immersion. It's a little scarred up. Rust pitting in there. It's why submerging these things in the water is just not a good idea. There's so much more than changing fluids. It gets everywhere. Now I gotta clean that all up. That's got to be spick and span clean, so lacquer thinner clean. Then I want to emery paper this. I don't want to change its diameter, God help me, but it needs to be emery papered. Good friend of mine came over and working BS at the same time, and I forgot to film. I also told you a bit of a fib. I said that you couldn't put this on with the rubber there. That's not actually true. You can't, however, put it on with the rubber in like this. You have to pull the rubber back, pull it inside out essentially, and then it can be put on. That makes sense? I think that makes sense. That's some silicone squeeze out from somewhere. Where the heck did that get on it from? Weird. Gotta make sure that doesn't glue itself together. Anyways, now you can put this ring on, get this tightened up, And I can begin the act of stuffing it full of grease. Even though I still don't know why. I still don't know why. Stuff it full of grease. But I'm going to stuff it full of grease. Maybe that's why they're full of grease. Maybe everybody looks at them and goes, this is stupid. But I'm just going to put it back the way I found it. I'm sorry, with the sealed U-joints, that being full of grease has absolutely no bearing whatsoever on any of it. None whatsoever. Zip, zilch, nada. If you got the Barfield or the CV joints, well, yeah, okay. Those things are greased because they run in a hub of grease. But that's a greasable U-joint. I'm going to grease it with some quality grease, and I'm going to put it back together, and then that'll be it. So I guess I don't understand. Nope, not going to do it. I smeared only enough grease to basically rust-proof the end of this axle, since it had been cleaned with lacquer thinner, so I could get the boot clamp to stick on it well. I'm not doing it. That's all the grease I'm putting in. There should be no need to grease it. It's frustrating that there is no way to grease that once it's in there. The grease in here does no practical purpose of any kind. It isn't waterproofing. It isn't going to keep the water out. It can't get in my bearings because I don't have the Barfield kind. So it's not getting past the seals. I'm just going to run it like this. I see no reason to make that big old glopping mess. As I grease the kingpins top and bottom, I have a little grease weeping out of it. Dang it, that means I didn't get that sealed well enough. Or I pumped grease into it too early. Anyways, as kingpins top and bottom, grease is going to get in there regardless. So that is good enough. Over the course of its lifetime, it'll get a tube or so pumped in there. Bada bing, bada boom. The big one I hear is water. If you drive it into water, that ain't going to keep the water out. It's just going to give something for the water to mix with. Okay, so that ain't going to keep the water out if you're driving it underwater. There's no practical purpose. Thought I'd come up with a practical purpose for packing that full of grease. Does that grease packed in there keep this bronze bushing where the front axle shaft kind of floats around? Does it keep it lubricated? But then when I checked down the bore there, because I haven't stuffed paper towels through that, so there's no indication that the grease is migrating. I don't think you can see it in this camera. There's no indication the grease is migrating past that bronze bushing. So, nah, it ain't that either. I don't know why they pack them full of grease. I suppose it's just a holdover from when they were a Barfield joint, and now they're a greasable U-joint, which ironically you can't grease. It's not that. My thought for as far as, hey, could I possibly grease that through those plug holes? No, because this big old axle cup at the end is in the way. Just pump it full of good quality grease when you put it together. That'll have to be good enough. So I knocked the rear bearing out because it looked like it had a little bit of brake dust contamination. But my gut feeling was it was fine, and I should have just gone with my gut because it appears to be totally fine. However, now we know it's fine. I took some emery cloth and I spent a long time polishing up with a seal road, which is still a little bit rough. Looks like old rust pitting from water immersion. Once again, driving these things through flooded water, unless you god awful have to. It's way more than changing fluids. But I think it'll be okay, just like I think it was okay before I mess with it. Gonna pull that bearing out. Obviously now I'm repacking it and put her back together. Well, that sort of went fast. I knocked out the seal, put in a new seal. It's actually bothered me ever since elderly Iron pointed out that I had put too little grease in there last time. Pointed out that I hadn't put enough in the drum, that if it warmed up, it couldn't redistribute itself because there just wasn't enough of it. So this time I got a whole tube just blurped in there. So that should be able to redistribute itself pretty nicely and move wherever it needs to move. You can get this on by yourself. You can manhandle it if you have to, or you can balance it on a jack. I've done it both ways. One involves more swearing. It's just a matter now of tightening up these bearings, spinning it, loosening the bearings all the way up, cranking them back down again. The book has an actual torque setting. It's surprisingly high. I'm just going to set them the way I always have. I mean, this isn't quite the same as a car because it's constantly turning on that huge drive line, so you really can't spin her and listen or whatnot, but yeah. I'm just going to do it. Can't really explain it. The book's got a thing. Just know that thing is really high. Surprisingly high. And I've never had any problems doing it my way. Then again, I'm in here every year, so yeah. Found a way to somewhat explain my thing. This is the head of my 3/4 drive. Basically, I will tighten it up about as tight as I can get it using nothing but this. So really it's not much more than grabbing the whole socket by your hand, but there is a distinct advantage right there, but it's still not very tight. Then I'll put the other ring on and snug it up with the outer nut. That is going to obviously put additional tension on this, but again, it's still so much less than what the book actually calls for, which is, I can't remember, it's a crazy high amount. I just remember reading it and going, oh crap. So, it should be good. They've never gotten hot. I've never had overheating. Yeah, you should know, however, that even when that first truck had the bearing put in dry, I drove it 1,000 miles on a dry bearing. Even it didn't have any overheating issues. That never got hot either, so they're tough. Built for abuse. It'll be fine. On this stud ring, okay, it goes over a stud right there. You should know that they are double-sided, right? So you can see how that one goes on. And yet if I flip it over, we line up on the halfway point. So you do not have to tighten or loosen this thing until you're able to use one of the holes. You have about half a hole rather than a full hole. That's a crap ton, guys. If you've snugged it up that much or backed it off that much, it's either way too tight or way too loose. Even half a hole is a lot. I don't know. Seems like they should be identical. I know it does. All I can tell you, they got some voodoo going on. It's not identical.